A medieval English tavern is not just a place to serve ale and keep travelers warm. This is a boiling cauldron of life, where destinies are intertwined, songs and stories are heard, and at each table there are people whose stories can surprise. It is generally accepted that in such places there was a certain atmosphere of rudeness and simplicity, but few people guess what incredible personalities could meet the traveler's gaze clouded by smoke. Are you ready to discover the true, shocking truth about who might actually have ended up in a medieval tavern? What secrets might have been hidden behind their shabby clothes? And why some encounters might have changed your view of the world forever? Get ready, because the fact that you will meet in a medieval English tavern, frankly, will plunge you into shock. We will tell you not just the facts, but the stunning truth about people who, it would seem, should not have been in such places. Why would there be an exiled noble lurking among the regulars, forced to eke out a miserable existence? How could a wandering minstrel be a spy for the king, gathering information? Why would a lowly merchant actually be a smuggler carrying illegal goods? How could an old beggar woman store forgotten knowledge in her memory that could turn the world upside down? This is not just a trip to the past. It is an immersion in the most unexpected corners of medieval English society, in the real, paradoxical life about which most prefer to remain silent. Forget about the fact that nobles always lived in castles and didn't descend to the level of commoners. Medieval England was full of political intrigue, conspiracies, and fickle alliances. Lords could fall out of favor with the king or be betrayed by their own vassals. As a result, many lost their lands, titles, and wealth to the brink of poverty. Some had to go into hiding to avoid execution or imprisonment. It was an era when fate could turn suddenly and cruelly, turning yesterday's nobleman into a beggar vagabond, forced to seek refuge in the most unexpected places. Stripped of everything that defined their status, lands, servants, armorial shields, and family jewels, they were plunged into a world they had previously despised, facing the harsh reality of survival. In a tavern where people from all walks of life gathered, there might very well be such an exiled noble. His clothes, though shabby, might have revealed the remnants of their former luxury. Fine embroidery on the sleeve, remnants of high-quality fabric, once expensive brocade, now barely discernible under a layer of dirt and dust. His manner, despite its forced rudeness, was different from that of a peasant. He could drink ale from a dirty mug, but he held it with an unusual elegance for a commoner, slightly sticking out his little finger or lightly touching the edge with his lips. His conversation might be sparse, but a casual remark about events at court, or a knowledge of rare languages, Latin, French, which the nobility knew, might betray him as a person of a different class. His eyes, often fixed on nothing, might suddenly brighten at the mention of a noble name or an ancient family, betraying the fleeting movement of a soul accustomed to another world. He might prefer a private corner, watching with detached melancholy, not wanting to draw too much attention to himself, but at the same time not being able to completely blend in with the noisy crowd. Such a noble might disguise himself as an ordinary wanderer or merchant, but his eyes were filled with sadness and bitterness, revealing deep emotions. They told a story of loss, betrayal, and unfulfilled hopes. He could avoid talking about his past by delving into himself, but sometimes under the influence of ale or sudden nostalgia, he would slip out about castles, battles, and court intrigues that would shock any attentive listener. Words spoken with bitterness could relate not only to personal tragedies, but also to grandiose political changes that ordinary people did not even suspect. He could describe tournaments and hunts, the dresses of great ladies and the decoration of royal chambers with such vividness that listeners were involuntarily transported to another, luxurious world. Sometimes such a person might seek not just hiding places, but also opportunities for revenge or restoration of his position, using the tavern as a place for secret meetings with former allies or those who still remain loyal to him. He could transmit encrypted messages or just listen in on conversations, looking for any information that might help him recover what he had lost. His presence in the tavern is not just an accident, but a sign of deep social upheaval and personal tragedies playing out against the backdrop of great history. It was a living reminder of the fragility of power and the fickleness of fate, a wandering shadow of former greatness among ordinary people. His silence was louder than any words, carrying echoes of fallen empires and shattered lives, and his presence added a touch of mystery and danger to the tavern's daily routine. Often, such people became unwitting participants or even initiators of conspiracies. Their desperation pushed them to the most risky actions, just to return at least part of what was lost. Their gaze, accustomed to the vastness of the domain and their high position, now wandered over dusty corners and dirty floors, but there was still a glimmer of pride and hope for rebirth in the depths of it. Their hands, which had once held feathers and goblets of wine, now clutched mugs of ale or engaged in heavy physical labor, but the memory of the past did not let go. They were a symbol of a changing world, where the old ways were giving way to new ones, and the destinies of great people could be reversed overnight. The image of a medieval woman is usually associated with housekeeping or monasticism. However, the reality was much more complicated. Some women, especially those who have lost their families or found themselves in a desperate situation, may have chosen a path that is far from traditional. In the face of constant wars and feudal conflicts, the demand for mercenaries was high. Although it was a rare occurrence, a female mercenary could exist. She could be an orphan, a widow, a victim of the devastation of a village, deprived of all hope of a normal life, and forced to rely solely on her own strength and skills to survive in a cruel world. Her choice was not a whim, but a harsh necessity, driven by desperation and a lack of other options. She wouldn't be a flashy beauty, but rather a stern, life-hardened figure. Her clothes would have been practical and discreet, concealing a solid build and possibly the scars of past battles and dangers. She could have sat in the corner of a tavern, silently observing everyone, with a sharp, piercing gaze that seemed to pierce through each person, assessing their strength, weakness, and potential threat. Her hands might be rough and calloused, used to heavy weapons or work, and her close-cropped hair was hidden under a hood or blindfold so as not to interfere with combat. Instead of feminine jewelry, she might have worn leather straps that served not only as an element of clothing, but also as part of hidden ammunition, or even a discreet blade hidden under her clothes, ready for instant extraction. Her gait would have been confident and purposeful, without the feminine grace, and her every gesture indicated a restrained strength and readiness for action. She could carry a battered leather bag with gray essentials, and even that bag would look like part of her combat gear. Her appearance in the tavern would have caused confusion, curiosity, and sometimes even hostility, because a female mercenary was a phenomenon that went beyond the generally accepted norms. But if a drunken bully tried to hurt her, it wasn't a frightened woman he would encounter, but an instant, professional reaction. A blow that was precise and strong, knocking out the spirit, or a deft movement that put the aggressor in his place. For example, a quick grab of the wrist, twisting of the arm, or even a throw to the floor, would show that this was not a simple woman, but a deadly force. She could have been a skilled archer who could hit a target with incredible accuracy, a crossbowman whose bolts penetrated the toughest armor, or even wield a dagger and light sword with incredible speed and agility, using every inch of her body as a weapon. Such women could be singled out or part of small groups, running the dirtiest errands, from guarding caravans passing through dangerous territories to eliminating unwanted individuals, which required composure and ruthlessness. Her skills could include not only the use of weapons, but also knowledge of poisons, disguises, and tactics of fighting in various conditions. Her reputation often outstripped her own, spreading rumors of her ruthlessness and efficiency. Her presence in Tavern meant that something far more dangerous than normal gatherings was taking place here. It could be a gathering point for a new contract, a place to pass on information, or just a respite before the next mission, where she carefully assessed potential opponents or allies. Her sharp analytical gaze swept through the bustle of the tavern, searching only for what mattered to her mission, making her invisible in the crowd, but also extremely alert. She was the living embodiment of innocence, wrapped in apparent simplicity, and her silence could be far more threatening than any words. Minstrels in the Middle Ages were not only entertainers, but also the main sources of news, gossip, and information. Traveling from city to city, from castle to castle, they had access to various strata of society, from kings and nobles to ordinary peasants and merchants. This particular feature made them ideal candidates for espionage. Kings and lords were constantly in need of up-to-date information about their enemies and allies. The mood in the provinces, troop movements, and political intrigues, and the minstrels, by their seemingly innocuous nature, were an ideal channel for gathering such information. They could move freely without arousing suspicion, and their profession gave them a natural excuse to talk to anyone. The minstrel in the tavern might have been quite ordinary at first glance. Cheerful, sociable, with a lute or bagpipes on his back, he would radiate openness and friendliness. He would sing songs about love and battles, tell stories, make people laugh, sometimes improvising to give the performance a special vividness. But his ears would be constantly pricked, his mind sharp, and his memory phenomenal. He would remember every word dropped, every suspicious handshake, every hint of discontent or conspiracy. His songs began to contain cryptic messages intended for specific ears, and seemingly harmless jokes, hidden questions, the answers to which could be critical. His musical improvisation could be used to transmit secret signals or code phrases to his accomplices. When he was playing, his eyes would move around the room, noting each customer, who was talking to whom, what was being whispered in the corner, who had come, who had left. He could talk to everyone, asking seemingly innocent questions about roads, crops, or the mood in neighboring counties, the welfare of a local lord, or the latest rumors from the capital. But in fact, he would collect bits of information from which he would then compile a detailed report for his customer. His lute could be hollow, hiding not only strings, but also secret letters, parchments with maps, or even a small cache of coins and jewelry received as payment for espionage services. What he earned by singing was just a cover for a much more serious job that required a sharp mind, observation, and cunning. He could change his image from a cheerful fool to a wise old man so that it would be easier to ingratiate himself with different people. It was almost impossible to detect such a spy, because who would suspect a harmless artist of being a royal spy who could influence the fate of entire states? He was a master of disguise and deception, his true intentions hidden behind the mask of a good-natured prankster, and his music was just the backdrop for his true dangerous mission. His ability to memorize faces, voices, and conversation details and transmit them in encrypted form made him an invaluable asset to any ruler. Sometimes he could deliberately spread misinformation through his songs, influencing public opinion or misleading enemies. His role in medieval society was twofold. He was both an entertainer and a secret agent, whose melodies brought not only joy, but also secrets that could change the course of history. The church in medieval England had enormous power, and heresy was severely punished. However, despite the Inquisition and persecution, secret heretical teachings spread and found their followers even among the clergy. Monks who grew tired of hypocrisy or sought truth beyond dogma could become conduits for forbidden ideas. At a time when faith was the cornerstone of society, any departure from official doctrine was considered not just a mistake, but a crime against God and the king that deserved the most severe punishment. Nevertheless, the intellectual ferment and inner doubts could not be completely suppressed, and some of the most educated and inquisitive minds, often located in monasteries, began to ask uncomfortable questions. In the tavern, you could meet a monk in a shabby cassock, which it would seem simply testified to a long journey and an ascetic lifestyle. He could be quiet, thoughtful, avoid drunken conversations and noisy companies, preferring the privacy of a far corner of the hall. But his eyes might be too penetrating, and his speeches, if he did speak, might differ from the usual sermons, full of church dogmas and pious instructions. Instead of quoting from the Bible, he could have talked about predestination, about saving the soul without the mediation of the church, about the equality of all before God ideas that at that time were considered deadly heresy. His voice could be low and measured, and his words could be carefully chosen, as if he was weighing each of them, afraid of being misunderstood, or, on the contrary, trying to sow the seeds of doubt in the ears of his listeners. He could say that true faith does not consist in the observance of rituals and donations, but in the deep connection of a person with God, accessible to everyone, regardless of their position. He might have carried a battered book with him, which he kept hidden from prying eyes, carefully hiding it under his cassock or in the depths of his travel bag. It may have been a forbidden copy of the works of John Wycliffe, an early reformer, or other heretic literature, copied by hand, perhaps even using secret symbols or codes. He could seek not only lodging for the night, but also like-minded people, spreading his ideas among the common people, tired of church arbitrariness and extortion, from the oppression of woodcut and the constant fear of punishment. His presence in the tavern would have been extremely risky, since exposure would have meant immediate arrest and subsequent painful execution, burning at the stake as an apostate. Such a monk could be an emissary of a secret society, carrying dangerous knowledge and subversive propaganda that could stir up entire regions. His words could be like sparks that could ignite the flames of rebellion against the church's authority, and his actions could be part of a large-scale underground network that seeks reformation or even a complete reorganization of the religious order. It would be the epitome of a hidden resistance, a quiet but powerful current that could undermine the foundations of medieval society. In his eyes, you could read not only the weariness of long journeys, but also an unshakable conviction of his own rightness, a willingness to go to the end for the sake of his ideals, despite all the dangers. His appearance, casual and unassuming, would have only served to reinforce the disguise, making him part of an ordinary crowd. But behind this facade was an inquisitive mind and a rebellious spirit that dared to challenge the powerful church. Many crusaders, returning from the Holy Land, could not find a place in their usual life. They saw the horrors of war, encountered other cultures and religions, which changed their worldview. Some of them lost everything in the war, or were so wounded that they could not return to their old lives. Many suffered from what today we would call post-traumatic stress disorder. Their psyche was irreversibly altered by the nightmare they experienced. Trips to the Holy Land were not only religious pilgrimages, but also bloody military campaigns that left an indelible mark on the bodies and souls of the participants. In a tavern, such a person could be immediately recognized by their appearance. Tattered clothing, probably still bearing the remnants of the Crusaders' emblem. The cross on his chest, faded and torn, but still discernible. Deep scars on the face or arms, which could not be hidden, showed signs of wounds received in battle. Torn scars from swords, burns from fire, marks from arrows or crossbow bolts. He could sit on the sidelines, avoiding noisy groups, and drink ale in silence, his eyes fixed on something far away, as if he still saw sandstorms or battles in the Middle East, and not the dusty floor of the tavern. His movements could be abrupt, or conversely, slow and clumsy due to old wounds. There was weariness in his eyes, deep sadness and restlessness. He might have nightmares accompanied by screams or moans, echoes of past battles echoing in the stillness of the night. He might suddenly be startled by a loud sound or sudden movement, his hand instinctively reaching for an invisible blade. He could only talk about his adventures out of great need or under the influence of alcohol, and his stories would be far from romanticized ballads about the Crusades. These would be stories of hunger, thirst, cruelty, disease, and insanity that would shock anyone used to peaceful living. He could describe the cannibalism that prevailed during sieges, the horrors of the plague, the treachery that were part of the war, and not just heroic battles. He could master combat skills that were not found in England, such as the unusual use of a short sword or a dagger used in close combat, and perhaps carry an exotic weapon, a short Damascus dagger with a curved blade, or an unusual oriental sword that no one in the tavern would be able to identify, causing some to fear, others curiosity. It would be a person who bears the imprint of another world, unable to adapt to a peaceful life, seeking oblivion in hell or solitude. His skin might have been darker from the Middle Eastern sun, and his speech might have been interspersed with Arabic or other Oriental words that he unconsciously intertwined with his English, making it even more foreign. His body could be covered not only with scars, but also with tattoos drawn in distant lands. He could be a recluse who shunned society, or he could find a way to apply his combat skills by offering himself as a bodyguard or hiring a nickname, which was the only thing he knew how to do after years of war. His soul was wounded more deeply than his body, and the wound did not heal, reminding him of itself with every sharp sound. every smell that reminded him of death and destruction. In medieval society, the line between witchcraft and witchcraft was very thin, and they were often intertwined. Healers were the only ones who could offer any help in treating illnesses or alleviating suffering, using herbs and folk remedies passed down from generation to generation. However, because of the widespread superstition deeply rooted in the minds of people, any woman with unusual knowledge or skills could be accused of witchcraft, especially if her methods of treatment seemed too mysterious or her predictions came true. In the tavern, one would meet an elderly woman who at first glance might seem like an ordinary beggar. She might have been dressed in shabby but clean clothes, her hands wrinkled but surprisingly agile, constantly picking through something, either herbs or beads. Her gaze would be penetrating, deep, as if she could see not only the appearance of a person, but also their inner state. And her words, when she spoke, would be full of wisdom or mysterious hints, sometimes sounding like prophecies. She could sit in a corner, not attracting attention, but listening intently to conversations about illnesses, misfortunes, or problems that disturbed the visitors. Her presence was almost imperceptible, but her influence on the atmosphere of the tavern was palpable. Some avoided her gaze, and others, on the contrary, stole glances in her direction. Sometimes she would offer help, an ointment for pain, a decoction for fever, or even a small spell for good luck, for which she would ask not for money, but only a small piece of cloth, a handful of salt, or strands of hair. Her means could be surprisingly effective, which would inspire both respect and fear. Some might whisper about her connection with the dark forces, her nocturnal rituals, or mysterious rites. Others might seek refuge in her from incurable ailments or evil spells. She might have carried a small bag of herbs, roots, dried flowers, or amulets made of bones or stones that gave off strange, earthy, or pungent odors. Her presence in the tavern would be twofold. On the one hand, she could be a source of hope for the sick and suffering, a last chance for healing on the other, an object of superstitious fear, and a potential victim of accusations of witchcraft, which could lead to tragic consequences. Her knowledge could go much deeper than just folk recipes. It could include ancient pagan practices passed down from generation to generation, forgotten secrets of the forest and land that the church condemned. She could be adept at divining things from the hand or the entrails of animals, interpreting signs of nature or dreams. Her wisdom was based not on bookish knowledge, but on intuition and a deep connection with nature, making her a true guardian of ancient traditions that resist the advance of Christianity. Despite the danger, she continued her activities, perhaps motivated by a sense of duty or self-confidence, and her eyes, full of calm and insight, said that she saw and knew much more than she could say out loud. In the Middle Ages, when mints were primitive and controls on money circulation were weak, counterfeiters were a serious threat to the economy. Making counterfeit coins was a very lucrative but extremely dangerous occupation. The lack of standardization, manual minting, and limited authentication resources made this area a breeding ground for fraudsters. The authorities, realizing the threat to stability, punished counterfeiting with particular cruelty, trying to suppress it in the root. However, the potential for easy profit was too great, and underground workshops continued to operate, often in the most secluded corners of cities or in remote villages, far from the eyes of justice. Such a person in a tavern might at first glance be an ordinary merchant or a wealthy traveler. He could have well-tailored clothes, look respectable, even dapper, to inspire confidence and deflect suspicion. However, his hands may have been unusually clean, without signs of rough labor, or, conversely, have subtle traces of metalworking. Small cuts, slight darkening of the skin from contact with alloys, barely noticeable calluses from tools. He could often pay with new shiny coins, which despite their apparent freshness, might have slight defects, an incorrect weight, or a strange shade of metal that would arouse suspicion from an attentive innkeeper or an experienced merchant. His conversations might have concerned the prices of precious metals, gold, silver, copper, tin trade routes, or sudden changes in the exchange rate in different cities and counties, demonstrating an unusual knowledge of these issues for the layman. He could hint at certain good deals, offering to exchange old coins for new ones or buy certain metals in large quantities. He could surreptitiously check coins for weight, sound, or appearance, whether his own or others, by passing them between his fingers, flicking them on the table, or holding them up to the light to see the minting details. He may have carried small, easy-to-hide tools, such as pincers to trim the edges of coins, miniature molds for casting, or even special files to create prongs that mimic signs of wear. He could look not only for buyers of his forgeries, but also for raw materials, lead, copper, tin, and sometimes even more valuable metals needed to create high-quality fakes. Its target could also be people who could provide it with sales channels, or those who had access to the necessary materials. Detection of a counterfeiter was punished in the most severe way, often by execution, by hanging, quartering, or cutting off his hands to prevent him from continuing his criminal activities. Therefore, he would be extremely cautious and suspicious of strangers, his eyes constantly wandering around the hall, assessing the potential threat. Behind his polite demeanor and apparent respectability, he would have been a dangerous criminal, willing to do anything for profit. And his appearance in the tavern could mean the appearance of a large amount of counterfeit money in circulation, which could undermine confidence in the local currency, cause economic chaos, and even lead to unrest among the population. His presence was an invisible but devastating threat to the entire community. The Middle Ages were a time of great hunger and despair, when people were ready to do the most terrible things in order to survive. Although it was extremely rare and frowned upon, there are recorded cases of cannibalism, especially during sieges or prolonged hunger strikes, when all other food sources were exhausted. Butchers who had access to butchering and knew anatomy could be particularly dangerous if their moral boundaries were erased by hunger, insanity, or indifference to human life. Their profession provided them with knowledge and skills that, in a perverse way, could be used for terrible purposes. In the tavern, you would meet a butcher who was seemingly doing his usual business selling meat or just relaxing after a hard day's work. He would have been burly, with strong hands used to knives and cleavers, perhaps with a blood-stained apron or dried bloodstains on his clothes, which was common in his profession. His face might be rough, and his eyes might be empty, lifeless, as if they had seen too much suffering or witnessed something unfathomable. However, if you look closely, his behavior might be strange. He might take an excessive, morbid interest in news of missing people, unexpected wanderers or vagabonds, asking leading questions about the latest victims of the plague or other misfortunes. His laughter might be too loud and unnatural, or it might be frighteningly silent. The smell coming from him might not be just the smell of fresh or butchered meat, but something heavier, indistinguishable, and instinctively repulsive, like stale blood or rotting remains that they were trying to hide. His meat, if he'd been selling it, might have been unusually cheap to attract customers, or it might have looked strange, unusually pale, with uncharacteristic fibers for ordinary cattle, or with signs that an experienced butcher might have identified as suspicious. Talking about starvation, food shortages, or hard times could give him a strange, predatory glint in his eyes that hinted at dark thoughts and hidden desires. His smile might have been too wide, showing jagged teeth, and his laugh might have been lifeless, devoid of sincerity. The signs of cannibalism would be thinly veiled, but on close observation, shocking. Perhaps unusually sharp knives, carefully hidden, or excessive secrecy in the work. He could be a man who had crossed the brow of eternity, and his presence in the tavern would be an ominous omen for any traveler, especially the lonely and vulnerable. His gaze, piercing and cold, could cause people inexplicable anxiety, and his silent figure in the corner of the tavern could be the source of nightmares and disturbing rumors. The 100 Years' War, 1337-1453, between England and France, lasted more than a century and left thousands of deserters and looters in its wake. Many soldiers who returned home were unable to adapt to a peaceful life, with no land or means of subsistence. They got used to violence, robberies, and murders, perceiving them as part of everyday life, and often continued to do this already in their homeland, terrorizing the local population and turning into real robbers. Life in the war had changed them forever, erasing the boundaries between what was allowed and what was forbidden. Such a veteran in a tavern could be easily recognized. He would have been strong, wiry, with a haggard face where deep lines showed not age but hardships. His face would have been covered with scars that spoke of past battles, cuts on the edge of blades, shield marks, burns. His clothing could have been military, but worn to rags, perhaps with the remnants of the emblems of military units that are no longer there, or someone else's ammunition, which he took as a trophy from a fallen enemy. He could drink a lot, be noisy, sing war songs, and talk about his exploits, robberies and murders, or on the contrary, be silent and detached, immersed in his own thoughts. His conversations would be full of invective, memories of battles, sieges of cities, the devastation of villages, and the cruel treatment of prisoners without a trace of remorse. His eyes might be blank, as if he saw too much horror, or they might be too sharp, constantly scanning others for threats or potential prey. He might carry an old but well-sharpened weapon, a rusty but deadly dagger hidden in his belt, or a short sword that he never let go of, even when sitting at a table. He could bear not only the physical, but also the psychological traumas of war, showing sudden aggression at the slightest provocation or bouts of paranoia, seeing a threat where there was none. Such a person, accustomed to cruelty and survival in inhumane conditions, would be dangerous and unpredictable, like a ticking bomb ready to explode at any moment. It could carry not only memories of Howney, but also her cruelty, ready to spill out on anyone who gets in his way. His presence in the tavern would have been a harbinger of trouble, or at least a turbulent night, for his presence alone radiated violence and chaos. He might have been a loner or a member of a small band of ex-soldiers who were still out there together, looking for new victims or planning another raid. His laughter could be dry and harsh, and his voice could be hoarse from years of shouting on the battlefield. Dynastic wars and struggles for the throne were common in medieval England. Often after the defeat of one of the parties, the surviving heirs or their close associates were forced to hide in order to save their lives and possibly, in the future, regain the throne. Such fugitives were a constant headache for the ruling dynasty because their existence meant a potential threat and an opportunity for rebellion. They were hunted down, huge bounties were placed on their heads, and every corner of the kingdom was an unsafe place. Such a person in a tavern would be the most unexpected and improbable encounter. A princess or prince would not sit openly, drawing attention to their appearance or manners. They could be disguised as a simple traveler, a pilgrim, which allowed them to move freely on the roads, or even disguised as servants, which allowed them to watch and listen unnoticed. Their clothing might be rough and low-key, concealing their true origins. But their manner, speech, or even the look in their eyes might betray them as someone of noble birth who was used to being treated differently. They may have had unusual knowledge for commoners, read and write, understand heraldry, speak foreign languages such as French or Latin, which were the languages of the nobility, or they could show amazing composure and resourcefulness in dangerous situations, which is not typical of ordinary people. It is possible that the princess may have been dressed in a monk's robe to avoid persecution, or in men's clothing to disguise herself as a young man. The prince could pose as a squire traveling with his master, who wasn't really there, or as a lowly merchant. They could travel with one or two loyal companions to keep them safe and secure, acting as their bodyguards and advisors. These companions might have been ex-knights or devoted servants willing to give their lives for their heir. Their presence in the tavern would mean that they were on the run, seeking shelter, gathering forces to return, or waiting for important information. If their identity was revealed, it could lead to bloody consequences for everyone who turned out to be ordinary, from ordinary visitors to the innkeeper himself, because hiding the royal personages was considered high treason. Such a meeting would not only be shocking, but also potentially deadly, drawing the unsuspecting traveler into a cycle of vicious politics and dynastic strife, where every step could cost a life. They would be the embodiment of a hidden threat to the existing order, living symbols of hope for some and fear for others, and their every breath was laced with danger. A meeting in a medieval English tavern would be much more than just a casual introduction. It would be a dive into the deep layers of society, where the boundaries between classes were blurred under the pressure of circumstances, and behind every mask there were secrets that could shake to the core. The people you could meet in these smoke-filled walls were living testimonies of the harsh reality of that time, a world full of dangers, injustice, but also incredible fortitude. These encounters would force you to rethink all your romantic ideas about the Middle Ages, opening your eyes to its cruelty, despair, and, at the same time, the inexhaustible strength of the human spirit, which is able to survive and fight even in the most unbearable conditions. Every sip of ale, every song, every exchange of glances in the tavern carried echoes of great historical events, personal tragedies, and amazing destinies. The medieval tavern was not just a haven for tired travelers, but also a kind of mirror, reflecting the diversity and paradox of the era, where nothing was what it seemed, and where the true nature of man was revealed in the most unexpected situations. And the one you meet in a medieval English tavern, frankly, will plunge you into shock, leaving an unforgettable mark on your memory. Write in the comments, what would you do if you were in a tavern like this and noticed one of these strange or suspicious individuals?